Well, it said 20 feet today, so who knows? Yeah, yeah. We'll be, we'll be bumping. I know because last time we were down there, remember, it was really bad. We had to call it. So. All right, good evening, everybody. How we doing? Great, glad to hear it. Welcome, everybody that is watching online. Nice to have you as well. Hey, I want to share, so the month of November is just really happening around here. And so I want to just draw your attention to a few things. This upcoming Sunday, for those of you that like to donate blood, Bloodmobile is going to be here starting at 8 a.m. They will be here until 1 o'clock out in the parking lot. And so you're encouraged to get involved in Bloodmobile. Then on November 9th, this is more for our online audience, parents of our teenagers, Michael is going to be having an important meeting in between services at 10 and is asking that you'll be there for that. It'll be in the reception room here in the Worship Center in Building A. And then on November 15th, which is a Saturday at 3 o'clock, we're going to do a co-ed cornhole tournament. So it doesn't have to be married couples. It just has to be co-ed, all right? And if you don't have a partner, then we will get you a partner. We'll assign you a partner, but that's going to be a lot of fun. And then at 5 o'clock, we're going to have a game night. And so we're asking everybody bring an entree with you. Bring a board game or a card game, and it's just great fellowship, and we'll do that probably till 9 o'clock or so. But that's going to happen on the same day, so Saturday, November 15th. And then for all of our young adults aged 19 through 30, Michael is putting together a Friendsgiving banquet, and so you are invited to come and to eat and to mingle and have a good time. For those of you that really like planning ahead, I save the date for December 21st. We're going to be having a home for Christmas family get-together here at SCC, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So that's going to happen the week of Christmas, and I'll talk more about that as we get closer. I want to encourage everybody, if you're not already doing it, make sure that you are checking out our prayer list. You can access it through our website. Just scroll down from the homepage. You'll see the blue bar there, and you can access it that way. You can access it through the app. I think you can click in the email, and it's on there as well. And some prayer notes right now. Just I ask that you will keep Bernie Jendrusik and Ed Albers in prayer. They're both in hospice situations. John Martin, Shang's dad, went in for chest discomfort, and they did a cath today. I haven't heard any update on John. He sounded in good spirits when I talked to him earlier, but just keep him and the family in your prayers. John and Jackie Bennis, as John continues to just convalesce and try to get better. He's been in the hospital. And then Judy LaRue, she and her husband Ed have been part of our family for a long time, and she is in the hospital with stomach issues. So those are just some of the people. There's a list of them. Just ask that as a church family, we would just continue to lift these people up in prayer on a regular basis. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and let's pray, and let's ask God to bless our time. So Heavenly Father, just pray your blessings over our evening tonight. And as we talk about this important issue of bearing your image. Father, help us to realize the significance of this. Help us to understand the importance of this and what this means as your human family. And we just pray your blessing over our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so a few weeks ago, we started this series on bearing God's image. So you've all heard that we're created in the image of God. And oftentimes what we assign to that kind of phrasing is we assign this idea of bearing the image means that we have the characteristics of God. You know, we share his emotional qualities. We share his ability to think and to discern and things like that. But that actually is not what this whole concept means. And in fact, I would dare say that it's caused some bad theology. And what we have to understand is that theology has consequences. So theology is the study of God. Theo meaning God, ology, study of. Theology is the study of God. And so your theology has consequences because what we believe about something or someone determines how we live our lives. All right? I mean, you just look at that in any area of your life, what you believe in politics or what you believe in about people or what you believe about things. It doesn't matter. What we believe is how we end up living our lives. And so the way that we read these early chapters of Genesis, Genesis 1 through 3 in particular, shapes how we see and live our lives. Because our sense of identity often gets expressed in what we do. And so here's where we're going tonight. We're going to talk about the Imago Dei, the image of God in our work, and how our work has a direct correlation and impact on our identity as well as the dignity of being part of the human race. So I started this whole series by saying that humanity is the crown of creation, all right? Evolution teaches us that we're just part of creation. We just evolved and, we're a higher form of life. The Bible teaches the opposite. The Bible teaches that humanity is the crown of this material creation, that we have been made in the Imago Dei, the image of God. And because of that, we are actually we're designed to be part of his royal family, being part of the family of God. And thus, this idea, this conception of image of God means that we've been commissioned to represent and to care for his world. I like how Dr. Michael Heiser puts it. He says that part of being made in the image of God, God wants us to be partnered with him to steward his creation. He cedes his authority to us, allowing us to steward his creation. So, being made in the image of God is a status that is conferred upon us because we're human. It is not a function. In other words, God gets angry, so I can get angry. God gets happy, so I can get happy. God thinks, so I think. So those are all functionary terms. That is not what the image of God implies. The image of God is a status. It is what you are. And so this status has all kinds of implications on ethics, all right, how we view morality. It has all kinds of implications on how we treat one another. And so this concept is huge when it comes to our identity, how we view ourselves, how we think about ourselves. And none of us can actually find who we really are outside of knowing the God who created us and calls us into a relationship with him. And so unlike the world and unlike our culture that teaches You create your own identity, all right? Be whatever you want to be, all right? Which that's where you're going to find your significance. No, our true identity is actually discovered. It's not created. Our true identity is discovered when we begin to understand God and who He is and how He made us. And this is why so many people end up kind of drifting through life, searching for meaning and searching for purpose in their life because they miss this truth. And it is super important that we come to understand the reality that you have never locked eyes with another person that is not created in the image of God. It does not matter what their belief system is. It does not matter if they're Jew or if they're Christian or if they're Hindu or they're atheist or agnostic or if they're from Europe or Asia or America or South America or Canada, wherever. You have never locked eyes with another human being that was not created to image God. The trouble is, they either A, through ignorance, or B, rebellion and reject it. They just don't understand it at all. And I would dare say this too. I thought about this as I was prepping for the lesson. I used to tell students when I was a youth minister, I said, you know, if you fully understand what God did for you through Jesus, nobody should have any self-esteem problems. They should be non-existent. And I don't say that flippantly. I say that from the standpoint of the reason we have self-esteem issues is because we don't understand this image-bearing concept, this imago Dei. So I hope that by the end of our study, not tonight, but as we finish this series, this is going to help not only give you a healthier self-image, self-esteem, but is also going to teach you about who you truly are and who you were truly created to be. So, as I mentioned, theology shapes how we live, how we think about God, how we think about His world affects how we shape our lives and how we live those lives. And our identity influences our work. It also influences our relationships. So there is a connection that exists between what you and I believe about something and how we act, right? So what happens if we misunderstand God's intentions? What potential bad theology can come as a result of misunderstanding God's intentions when He made us in His image? What are some things you can think of? This is where you get to talk. Yeah, so we'll begin to blur that, right? And we see that happening right now, this whole gender identity and confusion that comes as a result and all that, all right? What else does it cause? Yeah. 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 So how we view celebrities and athletes and how they feel about themselves and different things like that as well. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Some people have an inflated self-esteem, like it's way higher than it should be. Other people have a very low self-esteem. And sure, there are outside factors that influence that. You know, for instance, the environment that we're brought up in, the home life, the all of that stuff plays into this for sure. All right, but there are a lot of consequences that come as a result. So, in order for us to begin to peel back the layers of some of our misunderstandings and mistruths, I think it's important for us to go to the beginning. Take a look at the first couple verses at the end of Genesis chapter 1. Now remember, Genesis chapter 1 is a polemic, okay? It is a true retelling of how everything came to be. remember when Genesis was written, there had already been a lot of different creation myths. I covered some of those, like the Babylonian myths and some of the Mesopotamian last week. But there are already all these different creation myths about how everything came to be, how humanity got there. And if you remember, the way that the ancients used to think was that they were created by the gods for the purpose of serving the gods, right? That was their purpose. And so when you look at Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, you see a completely different story. So we get the first 25 verses that talk about the order of creation, and we come to verse 26. It said, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea. In other words, this is God saying, I'm going to create my human family, and then I am going to imbue and give authority to my human family to steward everything else that I've made. And I'm going to cause them to multiply. Now, this is more than just practical. If Adam and Eve never had any children, eventually, what would happen? More humans, right? Okay? Makes a lot of sense. However, there's another reason why God gives this command to be fruitful and to multiply. To my Catholic friends, you grew up in a Catholic church or Catholic culture and environment, or if you had been a pagan, okay, and you grew up in a, say, Greco-Roman religious context, right? When you would go to the temple or you would go into the Catholic Church, what is in there? What do you see all over the place? You see statues. What do those statues represent? Okay, so in the Catholic context, they represent the different saints down through history, all right? In a pagan context, these statues represent the different gods that are being worshipped, whether it's Hercules or Zeus or whoever, whatever kind of thing, right? Why are those statues and images in there? What do they do? What do they do? They're memory triggers, right? They're there to remind us, all right? Same reason when we go to Washington, D.C., and you see the Abraham Lincoln Memorial, you see Jefferson Memorial, you see all these different statues. They are memory joggers. Those images are doing what? Reminding you of something. Well, guess what? One of the reasons God created us in his image is for that image to reflect back to the Creator. And the more images there are, what does that mean? The more reminders of Creator God there's going to be. Does that make sense? All right? So it's not a stone statue that doesn't move or a marble statue that just stands there, sits there. No. Living, breathing reminders of the God that created. That's what every human being made in the image of God has been designed to do. Now, when was the last time you heard that at church? We don't talk like that. We don't think like that. But that's exactly the point of being Imago Dei. So, how does this then filter down through our work or what we do with our hands? Because let's face it, some of us were fortunate enough or are fortunate enough that we love what we do, right? It's like we were made to do it. There are other people that for 40 years worked in a job that they absolutely hated and couldn't stand. It's just all they knew or what was available to them or all they thought that they could do, right? I grew up in a small town, and every Friday and Saturday night, the bars were packed full of people that worked Monday through Friday, hated the jobs, and so they drank the memories of that week away, and then start on Monday and start the whole process again. And you'd see this in town after town, city after city, all over our country, right? Why? Because a lot of people have a very low view of work or what they do. But when a person discovers something that they're really good at and they get excited about it, all of a sudden it's like, it's almost like I was what? Born to do this, right? Born to do this. So, why does work fit with this idea of Imago Dei? Well, remember, we were created to cultivate and steward. Now, when you and I think cultivate, we're always thinking in agricultural terms. But let's face it, we're not all called to be farmers, are we? All right? I'm very happy that I'm not a farmer, okay? You should be very happy that I'm not a farmer because I can't grow anything, right? However, that's not necessarily what cultivation is implying. Now, in those days, this mic is really being weird, isn't it? Sorry. I'm going to move it down a little bit. Let's see. I'll put it on my shirt and we'll see if it completely pops off. It's driving me nuts when it keeps jumping in and out. Is that better? Can you hear me better? All right. All right. I won't flex my chest and shoot it out there because I'm sure that's a real problem. All right. So think about cultivation. Think about cultivation in terms of what we do. Now, we live in the United States of America, so we're just going to take our little slice of the world and our little time period for instance, okay? There are other areas to cultivate than just the farm, medical field, educational field, factories, computer science, AI. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. In other words, anything that you've done in your life is a form of cultivating. And that cultivation is helping to steward creation, all right? So for instance, before Christianity, there was medical science. However, because of the high view of life that Christians held, Christianity began opening hospitals. They began to open the orphanages and start doing all of these different things. And so they took this cultivating this field to the next level. So you and I today, we don't connect hospitals with the church. But without the church, you wouldn't have had the hospital. Does that make sense? So this just goes on down. So work is actually a calling from the very beginning. In fact, because work is mentioned in verses 26 through 28, that means work existed before sin. Work existed before sin. And work brings satisfaction, but it isn't your identity. So when we say things like, it's like I was born to do this, well, there's a reason why we're thinking that way. Because it's a misplaced view of our imaging of God. We were made and born to image God, but one of the ways God allows us to image him is what? Through our work, through what we do. So, have you ever met somebody who their entire identity was wrapped up in what they did? You know people like that? Maybe it's you, all right? And you can't even disconnect who you are from what you do because they are so linked. Let me ask you this question. Did Jesus die on your behalf because of your career and what you're good at? Or did he die on your behalf because you are valuable to him? What gives the greater sense of identity?
What gives the greater sense of purpose? So I love sports, football in particular, um, but a phrase that comes up often in sports is records are meant to be broken, right? Now, there's probably a few records out there. They may never, I mean, some of the stuff that Jerry Rice as a receiver set, I don't know that that'll ever be broken. Some things that Michael Jordan did probably are never going to be broken. All right. The big debate right now is LeBron James better than Michael Jordan? Well, LeBron James has played longer, but he has less championships, but he's got more points. But you're going to banter about that until Jesus returns. All right. But in sports, oftentimes these athletes that are at the pinnacle of their career path and field, when that career path and field is over, oftentimes they come crashing down because that's all they know. That's who they thought they were. And when their body doesn't allow them to do it anymore, what do they have left? That is what sin did. Sin and rebellion introduced a distorted view of identity and purpose. Work is to bring satisfaction, but it is not designed to define us. So, in my particular career path as a pastor, the generation before me, those pastors oftentimes connected. Now, if you were to sit them down and talk to them, they probably would not say it this way, but they would sit down and if they built a church, they felt like, yes, this I am successful because I was able to build a building. All right, new building. So that particular generation was about, I want to build up the amount of people big enough that we have to now build a new church or we have to build a larger church, okay? I can tell you, I have no interest in building a building whatsoever, all right? Especially in the state of Florida, it's an absolute nightmare, okay? What my legacy, what I want to pass on is I want people to love Jesus and to understand who he is. And as many as I can get to side with Jesus and get back into God's family, that's where, I don't pat myself on the back, but that's where I find my greatest satisfaction. I love God, and I know what God's done in my life, and I just want to share that and give other people the opportunity to have that. Now, that doesn't mean that numbers is wrong. I mean, I was very proud of us when we were almost 400, and I was getting excited about the momentum and all that. So don't get me wrong, but I also didn't start questioning my worth when that didn't happen again. Does that make sense? All right? And as far as a physical building goes, like I said, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But work is something that brings dignity along with it. All right? So, God, from the very first chapter, has provided a means to participate in a world that is supposed to flourish. All right? A world that's supposed to grow and to expand. So, when you partner with God in whatever career path you deem, fit to do, and that begins to grow and be successful, what does that breed? Well, that breeds worth, right? Like, wow, I'm part of the team. I'm making something happen here, right? Because we all want to be part of something that's bigger than us. We may not realize that, but we do. We want to be something that's bigger than us. And if we don't feel like we can never get there, then what do? As a culture, I say we. What does our culture do if we don't feel like we can achieve success and all that? What do we want to do? I mean, you're seeing it literally every day in our culture. It's been going on for decades now. We want to bring everybody where? Down to us and below. Why? Because now I feel better about myself. Is it now either we're all equal or I'm actually a step above. Our work does not determine our value, but it does imply our status as imagers. Because the work that we do is a vocational implication of outflow of our status, no matter what it is we do. So God gives us work to do, but we're not defined by that work. It doesn't make us matter. We already matter. So God wired us for meaningful work. Means when a person does not want to work, are they living in line with how God intended them to image him? No. This is why throughout Scripture you'll see negative comments about this, like, you don't work, you don't eat kind of thing, all right? That's not God being a meanie. That's just like God's saying, listen, I created you to bear my image in every area of your existence, including work. And if you don't do that, it damages my image. And I don't want you to do that. So, what happens when a person faces unemployment? There's a discouragement level to that, right? There's a loss of purpose. Now, we live in a culture, and again, we're not getting political on this. This is just a reality. We live in a culture where we are incentivizing people to what? Not work, right? There is no argument on that. We are incentivizing people to not work. And so no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, it is what it is, it exists, and it's problematic. It is, for a Christian, not conducive to how God created you as image. Now, listen, everybody goes through hard times, but God makes provision for that. And what should happen? But for that person to determine, listen, I don't want to get out of my hard times because it's easier not to, and to sit around and eat chocolate and watch soap operas all day, that's not how God designed us. That's not how God designed us. Is it any wonder in the last 40 years you have seen an incredible identity crisis in our culture? Why is that? Because there's a large segment of people that do not understand their role as imagers, and they do not connect this idea that God gave me work to do and that it's directly tied into my dignity. And that's why hand-ups become handouts, because it's much easier to not do something, right? Now, we could get into a whole line of, well, the system is against you, and I get all that. I get all that. But at its base level, this is the problem. This is the problem, right? My kids, maybe you grew up in a household. I grew up in a kind of household that we were going to college. It didn't matter. Like, that is what you do. You graduate from high school and you go to college. And if you don't go to college, you're a huge disappointment kind of thing. And I went to college and I still was a disappointment, but that's another story. Now, but I told my kids, listen, I don't care what you do. You just do something. Right? So I never mandated to Kyler what he needed to go do. I was supportive of whatever he wanted to do. All right, I will do the same with my girls. No, I suggest some things or, try to provide a little. But at the end of the day, I want them doing what they want to do. Because at the end of the day, it affects them more than it does me. I've had my time, right? Or I'm doing my thing, so to speak. Well, that's good. But what's not good is to teach kids, well, just sit around, don't do anything kind of thing, right? And we're reaping what we're sowing on that one. So, what is biblical care for workers? Boy, I love this. In the book of Leviticus, which is just absolutely, it's just amazing. So, on your own, I want to give you a reading assignment, okay? I want you to read this week Leviticus chapter 19 and Leviticus chapter 25, all right? And you're going to read some of it and you're going to go, this is just exhausting stuff. But you've got to understand what God's doing here. 19 and 25. 19 and 25. So what God is doing here is God is basically setting up job descriptions for his new nation that he's establishing. So for instance, in Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 and 10, it says this: when you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap to the very edge of the field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not strip your vineyard bare or gather its fallen grapes. Leave them for the poor and the resident alien. That means the foreigner that's passing through. And then it says something interesting. I am the Lord your God. In other words, this isn't Moses' opinion. This is God. So what is God doing right there in Leviticus 19? He's making allowance for people, isn't he? Now, let's say you own, again, agricultural society. Let's say you own the field, and the field is rectangular. God said, listen, you go inside the rectangle, and you get all that stuff in the middle, but you leave the outer. And the outer is going to be for people that are infirmed, they're poor for whatever reason, okay? Or they are not part of the Hebrew culture, but they're passing through, or they're living in the land for whatever reason, right? And they can't get a job because nobody will hire a foreigner kind of thing. You leave this for them. But what is it implying for the poor person or the resident alien? What do they have to do? They have to go pick it up. Because what is God trying to let you know? If you just give it to them, you're actually stealing their dignity. But you're creating a culture where you're allowing them to go and get it. So this played out in my life several years ago when I lived over on the West Coast. I was coming off of 75 onto the off ramp, and there was a homeless guy. I'm assuming he's homeless, holding a sign saying "hungry." So there was a Burger King. So I went down to Burger King. I thought, you know what, I'll buy him a Whopper meal and I'll bring it to him. And so I did. And he said, what's this? And I said, well, your sign says you're hungry. Here's your lunch. Oh, I don't want that. So what are you looking for? He goes, well, I just want some money. Well, what do you think that did to me? Well, the next guy I see holding a sign saying hungry, I'm going to be like, good luck, right? Because we become very jaded by that kind of behavior, all right? Now, I'm a pig. I would have taken it even if I wanted money and eaten it anyway, all right? Gave me something to do while I was still waiting for somebody to give me money, all right? I mean, come on, let's maximize our time here, people, okay? But that was very interesting. I thought, wow, you're not even willing to take what I got you. In fact, you're telling me that's not good enough. You know, could I gone to Longhorn down the road? Would you have rejected that? Like, what? So, God is trying to connect things for us. So yeah, that poor and resident alien, he's allowing them to be provided for, but guess what? He understands that their dignity is connected to them going in, right? Listen, you and I, we see this all the time. We live in a culture where people are now literally expecting everything, aren't they? Gimme, 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 okay? Does that create a healthy culture, or does it create a problematic culture? You get to decide, okay? See, this is outside of politics. You just get to decide. You figure it out. Now, chapter 25. Listen to what verses 2 through 7 say. Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land I'm giving you, so they're not there yet, the land will observe a Sabbath or a Sabbath. What does that mean? A rest to the Lord. You may sow your field for 6 years, and you may prune your vineyard and gather its produce for 6 years. But there will be a Sabbath, a seventh, of complete rest for the land in the 7th year. Do you see how this ties into Genesis chapter 1? All right. Days of creation talk. Okay. A Sabbath year to the Lord. You are not to sow your field or prune your vineyard. You are not to reap what grows by itself from your crop, or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. It is to be a year of complete rest for the land. Whatever the land produces during the Sabbath year can be food for you, for yourself, your male or female slave, and the hired worker or alien who resides with you. All of its growth may serve as a food for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. So, here's what God's doing. God is talking about creating a culture and an environment of dignity through opportunity. In 19, it was, your field. And in chapter 25, it's talking about rest. All right? So you work even for the most vulnerable. You make sure that they have something, but that doesn't mean that you are giving it to them. But God is also highlighting rest, a Sabbath. 6 years. Do all the farming you want to do, but you give that land rest, and you rest during that time. Why? Well, let's think about this for a second. Rest protects us from something. Anybody know what it protects us from? Well, you're not wrong in all those things. Idolatry. Rest protects from idolatry. Because it's during the rest that you have to be what? Dependent on who? God. When you don't rest and you work for yourself, who are you now dependent upon? What does our culture teach us today? You become self-sufficient, self-reliant, and that works great for us up until something happens in life that is outside the bounds of our ability to deal with. And so God sets up this Sabbath rest. Work is good, but it is not God. You know people that are workaholics? Know people like that? All right? I think it's an interesting phenomenon here in Florida. People will retire. They'll move down here. After about 3 months, they're working again. Why? Because they're bored. Not because they're broke. Well, some of them might be broke, but more than likely, they're just bored. They need something to do, right? Something productive. Now, does that mean that everybody needs to be like that? Not necessarily. But work is good, but it's not God. Do you know people who have a tendency to worship their work? Like it's all about work? Listen, I know people in ministry that live this way. When you hear somebody say, the church is my mistress, I've heard pastors say that. Like, I have a wife, but I also have a mistress. It's the church. And that's supposedly a holy kind of thing. No, listen, if I'm neglecting the home, am I actually representing God well? No, not. So Sabbaths protect us from being consumed by labor, by being workaholics. So this is really important because Genesis deals with creation, the creation of humanity. And God divides humanity up 2 ways. Help me? Biologically, male and female, okay? All right? So men and women, all right? God designed men and women for equal purpose, for partnership. And this has a lot of implications, not only down through history, but also even in the church. Right now, and it's been going on for a long time, but there is a major battle happening within churches between what's known as complementarianism and egalitarianism, right? So complementarianism says that men and women are equal in value, dignity, and worth. They are 100% made in God's image. But God designed different roles for men and women, especially in marriage and church leadership. And those differences aren't about importance, but about how we complement one another to reflect God's design. Egalitarianism, on the other side, says that men and women are equal in value, their dignity and worth. They are 100% made in God's image. And God designed them to share the same opportunities in marriage, ministry, and leadership. And so roles are based on gifting, not gender. Everyone leads, teaches, and serves as God has equipped them. Now, here's why this matters in the context of a church culture, all right? Whichever view you lean towards, the point is that followers of Jesus must learn to treat one another with honor, to serve one another humbly, and to leverage their gifts for the sake of others. Why? Because the world gets a clear picture of who God is and that we are created in God's image. We live that way. But the church becomes very vulnerable and prone to the same brokenness that the world has, where men lord it over the women, and the women are subservient to the men, and on and on and on. And so that's why you'll have some churches that will not let women touch leadership, and you'll have other churches where men and women share leadership responsibilities and different things like that. So this becomes an issue even in the church, and it becomes very contentious between Christians. But we see from Genesis 1 that God designed us to work in unison together, men and women together. So equal dignity and shared purpose. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is sin. The problem is the fall. The fall impacts work and relationships. It increases difficulty, but it does not change the identity. Now, I think I shared this last week, but I'm going to do it again, just in case you weren't here, or you forgot, or you weren't paying attention, which is all good and possibly all true. All right? Okay? Now, in Genesis chapter 3, which is all about the fall, okay? It's Adam and Eve's rebellion and sin, all right? Listen to what God tells Eve first. He says this. He said to the woman, I will intensify your labor pains. The ladies, it was going to be easy for you, all right? Sorry. You will bear children with painful effort. Now, this is the part I want you to hear. Your desire will be for your husband, yet he will rule over you. Right? Now, that desire is not talking about a sexual desire or anything like that. What that desire is talking about is you're going to desire to be in relationship. But because of the fall, he's going to, because he's the stronger, rule over you. Now, by the way, this is very, very similar to when Israel no longer wanted God to be their king. They wanted a human king. And so Samuel goes to God complaining about the people. And God said, don't worry, Samuel, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. You go ahead and let them have a king. But you tell them exactly what they're signing up for. And part of that is this idea that the king is going to rule over you. See, God wasn't ruling in the sense that he was lording it over. He was partnering. Why? Because that's what God wants, partnership, not ruling. But this has become very lost. Then to the man, says this, the ground is cursed because you will eat from it by painful labor. All the days of your life it will produce thorns and thistles. You'll eat the plants of the vineyard. You'll eat the bread by the sweat of your brow until you return to the ground, since you were taken from it for your dust, and you'll return to dust. The point is this. The fall has marred what God intended to be a good working relationship, which makes things more difficult. But partnership is what God designs. but it's in the fall that we lost. What did we lose? Trust. We lost our trust broken with God and each other. So, if you know the story of Genesis chapter 3, Satan tempts Eve, and Eve takes the fruit, and Adam is there the whole time, right? Okay, so he's right next to her. He's not telling her to stop or anything like that. And they eat from it, and then they realize something. What do they realize? Their eyes are open, and they what? Okay, when you and I read that in English, we're like, oh my, they just realized they're naked. And we think, well, what's the big deal? All right, or ooh, that's gross, icky, whatever. Okay? That's not what the Hebrew is implying. The Hebrew is implying something deeper. The Hebrew is implying that a trust is now broken. You're naked, now I see all your flaws. And I like those flaws, because those flaws are going to hurt our relationship. And our trust with God is now broken because God asked us not to do something and we did it. That breeds problems. And yet, the one thing that's not lost when Adam and Eve sinned was their dignity. Their dignity remained. Why? Because they're created in God's image. And it was grounded in God's love for them, not in their performance. So, why do you and why do some of us love our jobs, others of us hate our jobs, or some of us love our jobs to a point, but we wish we could retire and sit by a pool and sip Mai Tais, and others of us just will work till we can't work anymore and all this. It's all part of the fall. It's not how God originally created us to be. So, image of God was never lost in the fall. All right? So, remember the story of Cain and Abel? In Genesis chapter 5, we read, or chapter 4 rather, we read about Cain and Abel. All right? So, Abel brings a sacrifice, and God accepts it, and it's great. Cain brings his sacrifice, and God rejects it. What was the difference in the sacrifice? Well, Abel brought the best part, and Cain just brought some of it, right? But Cain never lost his identity as an image bearer of God. He was sent away, but he never lost his image bearer. There was consequence to his sin, but it didn't change the fact that he was made in God's image. What does that mean for you and I today? Our dignity is not based on ability or performance. So that homeless individual that is on the street corner has the exact same amount of dignity that you do, or should. But do we treat them the same? No. Why is it that Jesus said things like, whatever you do to the least of these, you do what? Me. What's Jesus implying? Dignity and worth. Now, what's marred all that is human violence and exploitation. You and I would live in a culture today. I mean, we just literally saw this a couple months ago. The violence enacted against somebody because of what he said. Or we exploit people because it gets us ahead or it makes us money, right? I saw a statistic earlier today. 1.2 or 4, something like that. Google it tonight, you can find it. 1 point whatever million girls and women are putting themselves out there on a platform called OnlyFans. And they're doing all kinds of things for basically guys, pay money, get to see them do these things. And they all have, it's the new form of prostitution, is what it is. It's virtual prostitution. That's all it is. And they're being exploited. And sadly, a lot of them can't even see that or understand that. That must break the heart of God, who wants everyone to understand they're his imagers and they have dignity and they have worth. Now, when we steward creation wisely, things thrive, don't they? Things thrive. Cain and Abel. Dignity denied leads to violence. All right? Cain felt, well, God, you rejected my gift, so I'm going to go kill my brother. Right? Versus, okay, what did I do wrong here that I need to self-correct? Right? Sin damages creation. And guess who suffers the most? The vulnerable. Right? Probably, maybe not the best, but certainly a top 5 living illustration of this is the nation of Haiti, one of the most corrupt nations on the face of the earth. Who suffers the most in Haiti? It's not the government. Not the government. People. People. Why? Because that's what sin does. And what it causes people to do is to assign worth and value. God says no. Everybody has worth. Even in the sin-marred world, we are still Imago Dei. So, how does this look lived out? Right? Every person reflects God. Again, it doesn't matter if they're a Christian, a non-Christian, whatever category we put in. Every person, right? Let me tell you why this cannot just be based on certain functions, right? A mentally handicapped person that does not have the same brain capacity that a non-handicapped person has. Does that mean they can't image God because they don't have that mental capacity? But see the direction that it goes if you think like that. Every person reflects God and thus should be treated with honor and dignity. You know what that forces me to have to do? Ask, am I treating people with the honor and dignity because they are simply image bearers, not necessarily because I agree with them or like the situation they're in? Secondly, as we work, our work should be done in such a way to promote flourishing in every area. Gosh, you know where I wish we got this concept today? Restaurants. All right, would you agree with me that since COVID, restauranteering has gone downhill? All right, now it actually started before that, but listen, I can remember, I grew up in a small town, and when I was a sophomore in high school, the only thing we had in our town when I was young was Dairy Queen. Like, that was it. Otherwise, you had to drive 20 miles to go to anything, all right? So when I was a sophomore in high school, they built McDonald's. I lived in a town of about 5,000 people. McDonald's, at that moment in history, had the largest opening day of their history until they opened the McDonald's in Moscow. My small town held the record for best opening day. If that gives you any insight in the kind of town I grew up in, right? Best thing to do was McDonald's. I didn't get to go for 2 weeks because my dad's like, we're not going, all right? We're not doing that. So it was a joy to go to McDonald's, right? And that McDonald's was locally owned and operated. The owner was a former Vietnam vet, and he wanted everything run very well, but he also kept everything very nice. Everything flowed very smoothly, okay? Remember when you actually got what you ordered, right? Yeah, there were some off mistakes and stuff. I mean, that's human error. It's going to happen. But man, it used to be nice, right? It used to be nice. Think about air travel pre-9/11. It was actually an enjoyable experience. I loved flying. I do not look forward to flying now. All right? I don't look forward to going through TSA. I don't look forward to the baggage drop. I don't look forward to who's flying the plane anymore. I don't know. Is somebody flying the plane? I don't know, right? I mean, if you look at our culture, it is it's not a disconnect that you see people not loving what they're doing with the rise in handouts. It's going hand in hand. All right? There are a few exceptions that Chick-fil-A somehow, now I'm sure they're not 100%, but Chick-fil-A seems to, they do a pretty decent job of it. All right? Although we did stop at, it had to be the world's worst Chick-fil-A somewhere in Georgia on the way back from CLY. It was a nightmare. I thought, man, when did I get to McDonald's? Like, that's what it was like. It was crazy. But when things work smoothly, places flourish, don't they? And that's just kind of a small microcosm, and I hope that even made sense. So here's what I want to take away. Work participates in God's rules. So it doesn't matter what the career is. You are participating in God's mandate to rule and steward creation. Men and women bear God's image equally. All right, so women don't have a little less and men have a little more. It's not like that. All right, we are equal image bearers. And rebellion, sin, harms said relationships. And dignity is universal. Right? So it doesn't matter if you are the poor, you have the same dignity as somebody else who's not poor. All right? So we're going to stop there for tonight. And thank you for joining. And we'll pick this up next week. All right? Have a good evening. Thank you, everybody that was online.